Swiss home prices were still rising above 4% in early 2026, yet one current listing in Ticino was asking CHF 65,000 for a four-room house. That gap is real, and it says more about Swiss housing than the luxury chalets ever will. Switzerland is expensive, everyone knows that. Geneva is expensive, Zurich too. Even many smaller lakeside towns feel locked. That story is true. It is also incomplete, because once you leave the prestige belt, the market changes, the branding fades, the glossy brochures disappear, the price tags soften, sometimes a lot. That is where things get interesting. Not flashy, not famous, just useful, livable, sometimes weirdly cheap by Swiss standards. And that is the key. Swiss standards. Real Advisor's current national snapshot puts the median house listing around CHF 1.27 million. So when a place shows up under CHF 400,000, or even under CHF 250,000, it is not just affordable for Switzerland, it is a different housing universe, hiding inside the same country. These are not fantasy castles. Some need work. Some are small. Some sit far from big city job markets. That is the trade. But the trade is exactly the story. If you care about value, not status, these overlooked towns start looking a lot smarter than their reputations suggest. Corban, Canton Jura, CHF 390,000 Corban sits in the Jura, Switzerland's least discussed western region, surrounded by farmland, small roads, and villages most foreign buyers could not point to on a map. One listing snapshot there priced a property on Route Principale at CHF 390,000. The details were modest but clear. 3.5 rooms, about 72 square meters of living space, and a location planted right inside a village corridor rather than on the suburban fringe. That size will not impress anyone hunting for a trophy home. But that misses the point. In a country where a small urban apartment can cost more than a detached rural house elsewhere, Corban forces a reset. At CHF 390,000, the conversation shifts away from aspiration and toward entry. That matters for young households, first-time buyers, and anyone who sees Swiss property as a long game rather than a luxury purchase. Jura usually gets overlooked because it is not a postcard canton. It does not dominate the global Swiss image. It is quieter, flatter in profile, more industrial in parts, and less mythologized than Valais or the big lake regions. That lack of glamour depresses attention, and depressed attention often means softer pricing. For some buyers, that is a problem. For careful buyers, it is leverage. Commuting is part of the equation here. Delémont is the regional anchor. Basel is not next door, but it is reachable. France is near. Daily life is slower. Land pressure is lighter. You are not paying a premium for being seen. You are paying for having a place. Why this is shocking? In Switzerland, CHF 390,000 usually buys compromise. Here, it buys ownership. Le Locle, Canton Neuchâtel. CHF 315,000 Le Locle, up in the Neuchâtel Mountains near the French border, has a long watchmaking history and a much tougher image than sleek Swiss lifestyle marketing ever shows. One current listing snapshot put a single house there at CHF 315,000. The detail set attached to it was unusually attractive for the number. A detached house, strong renovation potential, and a location on the western edge of town rather than in a compressed city block. That price instantly stands out. Not because Le Locle is a secret resort. It is not. It stands out because it is a functioning Swiss municipality, with rail links, history, jobs nearby, and real urban bones, yet it still sits outside the property imagination of most international buyers. Le Locle has always carried an industrial seriousness. That tends to cap hype. Hype matters in real estate because hype becomes pricing power. Without it, even solid housing stock can stay undervalued longer than logic suggests. In more fashionable cantons, a detached home with rare opportunity language attached to it would trigger bidding excitement. Here, it reads almost casually. There are trade-offs. The climate is colder, the terrain is harder, the shine is lower. But low shine can be useful, especially if the objective is value per franc. Neuchâtel, as a canton, also sits on the cheaper side of Swiss rent data, which tells you this is not just a one-off listing story. The broader cost culture is calmer here than in the prestige cantons. If you want Instagram Switzerland, Le Locle is not that. If you want price tension working in your favor, it might be. Why this is shocking. A detached Swiss house at CHF 315,000 sounds more like a typo than a border town listing. Fado, Canton Ticino, CHF 230, 00 Sado sits in Upper Leventina, north of Bellinzona, in a stretch of Ticino that many outsiders drive through without really seeing. One listing snapshot in Fregio, Fido, showed a home asking CHF 230,000. The headline details were plain and strong. 2.5 rooms, around 120 square meters of living space, and a setting inside a mountain hamlet rather than a dense urban block. That combination is what makes Fido so interesting. The room count sounds small. The interior footprint does not. So this is not just about finding a low number. It is about understanding the shape of the property behind the number. In many hotter Swiss markets, 120 square meters at that price is simply not part of the conversation. Fido has long lived in the shadow of better-known Ticino names. Lugano gets the headlines. Ascona gets the romance. Locarno gets the lake fantasy. Fido gets the transit corridor, the altitude, the older stock, and the leftover attention. That neglected profile helps explain why value still appears here. The village is not empty. It is not disconnected. It is just underrated. For a resident buyer or someone already established in Switzerland, Fido can look like a practical compromise between scenery and cost. The mountains are there, the slower rhythm is there. So is the reality that tourist prestige is not doing the pricing work. If the property needs updates, that becomes part of the math. But at CHF 230, 000, there is still room for math. Foreign non-residents should be cautious, though. In Switzerland, buying real estate is not just about price. Lex Koller can require cantonal authorization for foreign non-residents, and second home rules can tighten the field even further in some alpine zones. Cheap does not automatically mean easy. But for buyers who do qualify, the headline number is hard to ignore. Why this is shocking? CHF 230,000 in Ticino sounds impossible until you leave the lakefront fantasy behind. Chironico, Canton Ticino, CHF 65,000 This is where the map starts to feel unreal. Chironico, also in the Leventina Valley of Ticino, showed a listing snapshot at just CHF 65,000. The visible details were basic but arresting. 4 rooms, a compact mountain village setting, and the unmistakable signal that this was a deeply entry-level property rather than a polished turnkey home. CHF 65,000 is not cheap by Swiss standards. It is almost outside Swiss standards. Now, that kind of price nearly always comes with conditions. Expect age, expect work, expect layout compromises, energy inefficiency, and probably a long renovation conversation. Nobody should confuse this with effortless value. But even with all those warnings, the number still matters because it proves a point many viewers miss. The Swiss market is not one market. It is several markets layered on top of each other, and the lowest layer barely gets discussed outside local portals. Chironico is small. It is alpine. It is quiet. It is not where global capital goes to create wealth. That keeps demand selective. And selective demand creates the kind of pricing pockets that disappear in every country once attention arrives. For someone with renovation skills, patience, or family ties in the region, a listing like this is less fantasy than strategy. For everyone else, it is still useful as evidence. It shows how distorted the outside picture of Swiss housing can be. People hear Switzerland and imagine only 7-figure entry points. Places like Chironico break that narrative in one line. The risk, of course, is simple. Low entry does not guarantee low total cost. Swiss labor is expensive. Renovation budgets can escalate quickly. Insurance, heating, and compliance all matter. Yet that does not erase the importance of the listing. It reframes the ceiling of what is possible. Why this is shocking? CHF 65,000 sounded for a 4-room Swiss house sounds less like real estate and more like an old classified ad. Madonna del Piano, Tresa, Canton Ticino, CHF 369. Tresa sits in southern Ticino near the Italian border, in a zone where location can flip from modest to expensive very quickly, depending on micro-positioning, views, and renovation quality. One listing snapshot in Madonna del Piano came in at CHF 369,000 for a corner house with a small rustico. The attached details were unusually rich for the price. An inner courtyard, solar upgrades, and a recent renovation profile that suggested this was not just a shell. That is what makes it stand out. You are not merely buying a low-cost address. You are buying layered use. A house plus a small rustic change the conversation. It introduces flexibility, storage, workspace, guest use, maybe future adaptation. In a country where additional structures often push values sharply higher, getting that kind of setup under CHF 400,000 is notable. Tresa also benefits from border logic. Areas near Italy can behave differently from the central Swiss prestige zones. The emotional premium is lower. Cross-border labor patterns shape expectations. Local buyers know the terrain. International buyers often skip it because it does not match the cinematic Swiss stereotype. That mismatch creates opportunity. Not always, but often enough to matter. This is also the kind of listing that reminds you how much Swiss affordability depends on precision. Not just canton, not just the district. Sometimes one municipality, or even one hamlet, can sit on a completely different price curve from the regional brand name next to it. For buyers who want the Ticino climate and a more southern rhythm without surrendering completely to southern canton price escalation, places like this become important. They are not elite markets. They are useful markets. And useful markets are where underrated deals survive the longest. Why this is shocking: in southern Ticino, a renovated corner house with extra structure at CHF 369,000 feels dramatically mispriced by reputation. Simplon-Dorf, Canton Valais, CHF 335. 500 Simplon-Dorf is high in Valais, close to the Simplon Pass, with dramatic topography and far less international attention than the canton's famous resort names. One listing snapshot there showed a charming chalet with a garden at CHF 335,500. The detail set included a garden, holiday home positioning, and a village location in one of Switzerland's most visually powerful but least discussed mountain corridors. Valais usually enters global conversation through places like Verbier, Zermatt, or Crans-Montana. Those are premium narratives. Simplon-Dorf is not part of that script. It is a working mountain village. Beautiful, yes. Branded, no. That difference matters because scenery alone does not set the price. Scenery plus status does. Without status, some extraordinary places remain oddly reachable. CHF 335,500 for a chalet in Valais changes expectations fast. It does not mean every home there is cheap. It does mean the canton contains two completely different realities at once. One is luxury alpine Switzerland. The other is practical alpine Switzerland. Simplon-Dorf lives much closer to the second. There is a legal angle here as well. Properties marketed as second homes or holiday homes can trigger more scrutiny for foreign non-resident buyers under Swiss purchase rules. Lex Koller and local authorization requirements can become decisive. So the deal exists, but access depends on who the buyer is and how the property is classified. For Swiss residents or buyers already entitled to purchase, however, the number is striking. The garden matters, the chalet form matters, and the psychological gap between Valais and CHF 335,500 matters most of all. It breaks the assumption that mountain cantons are automatically unattainable. Why this is shocking: a chalet with a garden in Valais at CHF 335,500 clashes hard with everything most people assume about Alpine Switzerland. Bitch, Canton Valais, CHF 389. 00 Edzern Bitch is another reminder that Valais is not one housing market. It sits in Upper Valais, close enough to infrastructure and daily services to remain practical, but far enough from prestige tourism to stay off most foreign shortlists. One listing snapshot in Bitch showed a Valais house with 3 apartments asking CHF 389,000. The notable details were clear: 3 separate apartment units, visible historic character, and stated development potential. That last part is the hinge. Development potential at a sub-CHF 400,000 price point in Switzerland gets attention because it means the value is not only in occupation, it may also be in rearrangement, rental use, multi-generational living, or phased renovation. In more expensive cantons, people pay heavily for optionality. Here, optionality was bundled into the listing language. Bitch is not glamorous. That helps. It is close to the kind of roads and rail access that make mountain life workable, not isolated. But it does not sell itself globally as an aspiration zone. The market, therefore, He prices it more like a local utility than a luxury object. For disciplined buyers, that can be a better starting point. Of course, multi-unit properties introduce complexity. Renovation standards, tenancy issues, code compliance, and heating systems all matter. Older Valais homes can look romantic in photos and brutal in invoices. That is the caution. Yet even after saying all of that, CHF 389,000 for a 3-apartment setup remains notable. It also points to a broader truth. In Switzerland, the best deal often is not the prettiest house. It is the one with enough functional upside that the lower asking price is only the first layer of the story. Why this is shocking. 3 apartment units in a Swiss mountain canton for CHF 389. Sounds like a price from another decade. Brusio, Canton Graubünden, CHF 500,000 Brusio, the Italian-speaking side of Graubünden, well away from the luxury image attached to St. Moritz, or the Engadin. One current listing snapshot there put a single house at CHF 500,000. The standout details were strong. A 5.5-room layout, a spacious 1,207 square meter plot, and a quiet natural setting rather than a tight village squeeze. 500,000 francs is not cheap in a vacuum. In Switzerland, however, context decides everything. A detached house with 5.5 rooms and over 1,200 square meters of land inside Graubünden belongs to a price category many viewers would expect to be much higher. The canton's global brand has been hijacked by its luxury peaks. Places like Brusio live outside that branding halo. That matters because Graubünden is huge and highly uneven. Resort markets distort the canton's reputation. Once you move beyond the famous names, the value picture changes. Italian-speaking valleys often sit on different demand curves, with smaller buyer pools, older stock, and a more local rhythm of ownership. Those conditions soften prices. Brusio is also a place where lifestyle value does not map neatly onto market value. The scenery is real, the quiet is real, the land is real. What is missing is mass visibility. Real estate markets love visibility. When they do not get it, pricing can stay calmer than the asset itself might suggest. For buyers who want space more than social proof, Brusio becomes very hard to dismiss. The plot alone shifts the equation. In much of Switzerland, land is the part you cannot get back once the market gets hot. Here, land is part of the offer already. Why this is shocking? In Graubünden, 5 rooms and a 1,207 square meter plot at CHF 500,000 undercut the canton's luxury reputation in one move. Campascio, Brusio, Canton Graubünden, CHF 330,000 still. Inside the municipality of Brusio, the village of Campascio showed another listing snapshot that pulls the market even lower. The asking price there was CHF 330,000. The listed details were direct and unusually generous for the number. 7.5 rooms. Village house scale rather than apartment scale, and enough space to suggest either a large household or a staged renovation strategy. This is the kind of listing that resets expectations fast. 7.5 rooms in Switzerland usually signal a family-sized property with meaningful internal flexibility. It does not automatically mean modern finishes or low future costs. But in a country where room count often drives price into a different bracket, altogether, CHF 330,000 draws a sharp line under just how disconnected some peripheral markets are from the national image. Campascio benefits and suffers from the same conditions. It is calm, it is scenic. It is not where Swiss housing ambition manifests itself. That depresses pressure. Pressure is what creates unaffordable narratives. When pressure stays low, even large homes can remain in range longer than outsiders expect. It also helps that this part of Graubünden speaks to a narrower pool. Language, valley geography, and local economic patterns all influence demand. That can reduce competition. Reduced competition is rarely celebrated in a brochure. It is often exactly what creates a deal. For a buyer with patience, this type of property can support several use cases: family living, split use, slow renovation, storage-heavy lifestyle, even semi-rural working from home. It is not universal, but it is real, and that matters more than whether the village has strong name recognition. Why this is shocking. CHF 330,000 for 7.5 rooms in Switzerland makes big house ownership feel far less mythical than advertised. Hetzingen, Glarus Süd, Canton Glarus. CHF 520,000 Hetzingen sits inside Glarus Süd, a mountainous municipality in eastern Switzerland that almost never appears in global Swiss property conversations. One listing snapshot there priced a home at CHF 520,000. The attached details were attractive on first read: 6 rooms, roughly 140 square meters of living space, and a description emphasizing a lovingly renovated home with plenty of room for a family. This entry matters because it shows that underrated does not always mean dirt cheap. Sometimes it means reasonably priced relative to utility. A 6-room renovated family home at CHF 520,000 would still stand out in many countries. In Switzerland, where size and condition usually push the number much higher, it becomes even more notable. Glarus does not market itself like Zurich, Zug, or lakeside central Switzerland. It carries less prestige capital, but it has mountains, rail connections, industry, and a deeply practical culture. That tends to produce a quieter housing market. Quiet markets are often where solid value survives. There is also a family buyer angle here. Not everyone wants a tiny entry apartment just to say they bought in Switzerland. Some buyers need rooms, storage, flexibility, school routines, parking. They need a house that functions on a Tuesday morning, not only in a drone shot. Hetzingen speaks more to that kind of buyer than to the status-driven one. The asking price is high enough to feel serious, but low enough to feel rational. That middle ground is underrated. Switzerland has plenty of obvious luxury and obvious fixer-uppers. What it has less of, in the public conversation, is the quietly workable family house outside the big brand cantons. Why this is shocking: a renovated 6-room family house in Switzerland at CHF 520,000 feels far more sensible than the national stereotype allows. Evelyn? Canton Valais, CHF 690,000 Evelyn, in the Val d'Arens of Valais, is the most expensive entry on this list, and it still belongs here. One listing snapshot showed a chalet under construction at CHF 690,000. The visible details included 5.5 rooms, a quiet and sunny setting on the heights of the village, and the major advantage of buying something still being realized rather than inherited in outdated condition. On paper, CHF 690,000 may not sound like a deal. In Swiss mountain real estate, the context changes immediately. This is Valais. This is chalet country. This is the architectural form many global buyers imagine when they picture Switzerland. And it still comes in well below the national median house listing. That is why Evelyn closes the list so well. It shows that underrated housing is not only about the absolute bottom of the market, it is also about the gap between perceived value and actual value. In a more famous Alpine postcode, a quiet, sunny, 5-room chalet project would likely sit on a much steeper curve. Evelyn also has a real identity: traditional architecture, strong landscape appeal, a more rooted village culture than some fully commercialized resort zones. That can preserve demand over time without forcing every property into elite pricing territory. For the right buyer, that is a sweet spot. The usual caution applies. Construction stage properties require scrutiny. Specifications matter. Timelines matter. Buyer eligibility matters. In Alpine Switzerland, foreign non-resident buyers should always verify whether the property can legally be acquired under local and federal rules before getting attached to the asking price. Still, the number belongs in the conversation, because once the Swiss market is viewed through function, geography, and legal access instead of fantasy, places like Evelyn stop looking secondary. They start looking rational. Why this is shocking: a 5-room chalet built in Valais at CHF 690,000 feels cheap only because the Swiss benchmark is now so high. So what do these towns really tell us? Not that Switzerland is cheap. It is not even close. What they tell us is simpler. The Swiss market is badly misunderstood. From the outside, it gets flattened. Luxury resorts, big cities, 7-figure headlines. That is the exported version. The domestic version is more uneven, more local, more practical, and sometimes far more affordable. The best underrated deals tend to share the same traits. They sit outside prestige circuits. They serve real daily life instead of an image. They often require flexibility, renovation tolerance, or a weaker attachment to status. In return, they offer something increasingly rare in Switzerland: room to enter the market without playing at the very top of it. That does not erase the barriers. Mortgage rules are strict. Renovation costs are real. Foreign buyers face legal limits in some cases. Commutes matter. Language matters. Local knowledge matters more than ever. But that is exactly why these places stay underrated. Because the market rewards visibility, and these towns still have very little of it. For buyers, that can be a warning, or an opening, usually both.